Welcome to High Strangeness, where we ask questions and explore all that is strange and unexpected in our reality.
Welcome to High Strangeness. I am your host, Tony, and this is the place where we talk all things strange and unexpected. Today's episode is going to be an interview episode, and I'm excited. As we get into the warm weather months, one of the things that are strangely unexpected and very important to talk about are wildfires. Now, I live here in Utah, and it's pretty normal to have a number of these occurring across the state throughout the summer. These are very dangerous and scary. For most people, these fires are a quick soundbite on the news, or maybe it's something they see like smoke at a distance, and they wonder, wow, I wonder what's going on over there. And that's a lot different than seeing that in the nearby hills as you're driving on the highway, or have the fire approaching your home because maybe you live near hills or a wilderness. Now, it's also very different than somebody who's actually fighting that fire, where we'll never really understand what that's like. And that's why I'm very excited for our interviewee today, who's going to help us understand a little bit about how that must feel. Most of us will never know that feeling, and so I'm excited for today's guest, but let me take a minute to just do a short introduction before we learn more about him and the book that he's going to help us talk about today. Mr. John Maclean is a seasoned journalist and the son of a famous writer, Norman Maclean. His book, Fire on the Mountains, is a gripping nonfiction book that dives into the tragic events surrounding the South Canyon Fire of 1994 in Colorado. John provides a detailed, meticulous researched account of the fire, which tragically claimed the lives of 14 firefighters. Now, people, I have read the book, loved it. It was very powerful, and John does a great job putting you in the scene where you can see in your mind's eye the rugged terrain, the crazy weather conditions, and the changing behavior of the fire, as well as the complex situations, firefighting strategies, and the human decisions that were made at that time. So with that, I would like to welcome to the show, John. How are you, John?
I'm pretty good, Tony. How are you?
Very good. I'm excited about our interview today. Like I said, I read the book. It was wonderful, and I think the audience will enjoy what we talk about today, learning about some of this and also your book.
Thank you for your kind words.
So you are coming or with us today from Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
How are things over there in Washington, D.C.?
It's very nice. We've had a colder than usual spring, but it's kind of broken. And we've had some beautiful weather. Yesterday was perfect. High 70s, close to 80s. I was out on the Potomac River in my canoe.
Nice.
And oddly enough, Fire on the Mountain, my book came up. It was an odd thing. Washington, you see a lot of the same people that you see out in the field. It's a collection point. You know, there are a lot of Washington offices, WO, and so on, for the Forest Service. I got to the canoe club and was putting my life jacket and paddle into the club canoe, and a guy came up, and he obviously had been counting on using the club canoe, you know, and he got there 5 minutes after I did. He said, "Would you mind if we paddled together?" And I looked at him. He's in my age group and looked really fit. So I said, "Yeah, please, let's go." It was kind of windy, so having two guys in the canoe is a big advantage. So we're paddling, and it turns out we have a lot of things in common. We started talking, and we have Missoula, Montana in common. How odd. Well, it isn't that odd. He was in the Forest Service in Missoula and was head of wild and scenic streams and one thing or another. So fine. So we paddle a little farther. We start talking about what you were talking about, which is fire.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, I was out in Missoula for a long time. He said there were two really classic books written about that. One was Young Men and Fire, written by this famous author. And the other one, his son wrote a book. I read that one too, Fire on the Mountain. That was a classic. All right, how do I slide into this without, upsetting the canoe? So I said, yeah, I wrote that second one. And he said, so then we traded information, and I hope we get together to paddle again. That's what it's like in Washington. I mean, it is not an isolated place. People say it is, but people come here from the West, the Midwest, everywhere else, and share their experience. And when it's good, it's very good. And if you read the newspapers regularly, when it's bad, it's really awful.
That is awesome. And I think it's interesting how that just worked itself out that way, and you got a chance to really connect with somebody. Life's strange, isn't it? Like how things like that can happen. So,
that my dad's stuff, River Runs Through It, and Young Men on Fire really have a lot of reach. And I've added to the bookshelf a lot. And that is not unusual.
Yeah.
That happens. You start talking to somebody, when I'm talking about fishing and when I'm talking about fire. Those are the two things my father and I have written books about. When I was a newspaper man for over 30 years, I did a lot of other things. But that's been it. And you get around to it.
Yeah.
You get around to A River Runs Through It because it's one of the two great fishing stories in American literature. The other being Ernest Hemingway's Big Two-Hearted River. And you talk about fire, and then pretty soon you get into talking about the literature of fire. And I don't mean to brag, but those two books, Young Men on Fire and Fire on the Mountain, which are complementary, I defy anybody to come up to that class.
Right.
Try hard, guys, and maybe you'll top it, but so far nobody has.
Yeah. Brag all you want. It's a great book, and I'm sure the other one is. I haven't had a chance to read that, but this is great. Thank you for sharing a little bit about stuff going on with you right now, and that was a great story, meeting somebody like that and having that kind of situation just develop out of nowhere. I love that. Well, awesome. I'm excited once again to have you on here. I know we're going to really have a good time talking about this subject and your book. So let me jump right into some questions if that's okay. I'd like to start off. I always like to ask people to share a little bit about themselves. I'd like to, as people get in and get ready to read your book here and things like that, it's good to just understand the author and kind of like a little bit about them. It creates a little bit of connection. Can you tell us a little about you so that fans and readers can just connect with you a little bit?
Okay, I'm kind of a Raggedy Ann doll, a patchwork of things. I started my career in journalism in Chicago as a police reporter. And now that I'm getting to the end of things, I think back about what I really enjoyed and what I didn't. And one of the things I really enjoyed was covering police and courts and street life in Chicago. I grew up around the University of Chicago, where my father taught, and in Montana, where we went every summer. So I said, this is a patchwork. So that going to work for a news agency, the City News Bureau in Chicago, and then for 30 years for the Chicago Tribune, was a very different experience of Chicago. I discovered a very different Chicago, much more vital one in its own way. The University of Chicago is one of the great learning institutions in the world. I mean, and in the current debate on free speech on the campus, it is a great leader. So, not to knock it, but it's down there in Hyde Park, and it's cut off from the rest of Chicago in a lot of ways. So when I left Hyde Park and started covering street life, crimes, murders, courts, the daily happenings, it was a very different experience and one I enjoyed a great deal. And I wound up in Washington, in the Washington Bureau of the Chicago Tribune. I was always too young for the assignments I got due to a variety of circumstances. Vietnam War soaked up the manpower. The Chicago Tribune needed young people and promoted them very, very quickly. So I wound up being the youngest city desk reporter that anybody knew about at the Tribune, and then the youngest Washington correspondent for the Tribune that anybody knew about. There may have been somebody, I don't know. I never looked it up and didn't want to. And I did the Washington thing for about 20 years. And we've been based, my family's been based here. This is where my kids were raised. I went back to Chicago actually for a final tour at the time when my father was at the end of his life, the last 3 or 4 years of his life. And I was glad to be able to do that, to reconnect with him, even though it was a difficult time for him. And then we had that whole thing. You had the movie, Robert Redford's movie of A River Runs Through It. We had the book Young Men on Fire, which was not published in my father's lifetime. And my sister Jean and I had to make a decision as whether to publish it at all. I mean, this seems like a no-brainer, but that book went through a lot of evolutions, and it wasn't at the beginning what the fine book that it was at the end. Anyway, we had it published. It came out roughly at the same time as the movie. So all of a sudden, things were happening all over the place. And I was glad to be in Chicago and working for the Tribune. I wanted to be the foreign editor for a while. But that was, I think the high point of my journalistic career was flying around the world with Henry Kissinger when I was the diplomatic correspondent in Washington for about 10, 11 years. Then, all of a sudden I looked around and I had 30 years at the Tribune, and the big rush with the movies and the books was over, and my career was becoming repetitious. And after 30 years, it's time to get out. And I quit. What happened was there was a fire in west central Colorado on Storm King Mountain that was a mirror image of the fire my father wrote about in Young Men on Fire, the Man Gulch Fire, which this year is coming up for its 75th anniversary. And I've been invited to give the keynote talk in Helena on the date of the fire, August 5th.
Wow.
And my friends were telling me, John, you should write a book about this Storm King fire, because it's so much like your dad's fire. Now, I was still working at the Tribune when that happened. And an editor came over and he said, John, you should really be writing this story. And I said, well, we're 3 or 4 days into this now, and 13 people have been killed. And the AP and the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post are all out there, and they've been all over this thing. If I go out there, you're going to slap a Maclean byline to get the hit with Young Men on Fire on a story that basically other people have reported. I can't get ahead in 24 hours. Why don't I wait? Why don't I wait until the anniversary of the Man Gulch Fire and go to Man Gulch? And if we're all saying, oh, this is just like the Man Gulch Fire, let me go find out if it is. I can get my dad's research partner, Laird Robinson, to go. I can get a couple other people for their thoughts and reflections. And we'll go into the Gulch and talk about this, and I'll do a story. And so I did. And the story came out as a long story in the features section. And a bright young editor had put on the headline, Fire on the Mountain. And I really liked that. I thought, that's great. And I thought, well, I've also done my job. And it's over. Now I can go on and somehow finish out my journalistic career and do something else in life. And then I called up the family of the smoke jumper in charge, Don Maclean. They lived at the mouth of Blodgett Canyon. And Blodgett Canyon is a major geographic feature in one of the stories in the back of my dad's book, A River Runs Through It. He and a Forest Service crew go into Blodgett Canyon, and he comes out of Blodgett Canyon. It's a good story. I thought, this is just getting too many hits. And the family, I really liked them, Bob and Nadine Mackey. They wanted to talk. They wanted to talk about their son. And their son was a remarkable person. He was a modern-day mountain man, Don Maclean. He was a hunter. He wasn't a fisherman. A trapper, a collector of traps, an extraordinary hiker. And he had been cast into a position on the South Canyon fire that he should never have been in. he was the superintendent position. And the only reason he got it is that he was first out of the smoke jumper airplane. That's what they do up in Alaska to give the guys experience. You're first out, you run the fire, even though you've never run one before. Well, in Alaska, you're burning 100,000 acres of black spruce and nobody cares. Maybe you put wraps around one old loggers or one cabin out in the tundra, but that's it. Those are the only values at stake. You get down to lower 48, the game is very different. And that fire was in sight of an interstate highway. And on both to the east and west, there were developments, suburban-like developments. And while the actual locale, the mountain itself, was very wild and rugged, it was in the wildland-urban interface. So you did things that you were a little more aggressive than you normally are. You didn't want that fire getting down and burning 100 houses. Don made a decision on how to fight the fire, and it was disputed by people who were with him, his smoke jumper friends. That included his brother-in-law, who was a fellow smoke jumper. But in the end, everybody decided that if you're going to fight the fire at all, you'd fight it the way Don set out to do it, which was to build a downhill line and try to capture the fire underneath before it dribbled down the side of the mountain and choke it off. And about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the fire blew up. Don was with a large group, at the end of a fire line. He sent friends of his, Missoula smoke jumpers, up to the ridgetop to safety, but there was a group back on the fire line that he had put in harm's way. And he went back to what they'd call clearing the line, Tony, which is you make sure that everybody's off the line. And he died with them. Well, it was a tough decision. I talked to his dad about it, and I talked to other people about it. And I wound up with his father, Bob Mackey, standing virtually in the boot prints that Don made at the time he made that decision as to whether or not to join his friends, to go up with his friends. They expected him to join them to safety, or to go back and clear the line. And because of that decision and talking to his family about it, I decided to do a book. And I quit the Tribune, got a book contract, and next spring I jumped in my Jeep and went out to Storm King Mountain. It took me 5 years to do the book, and I kind of held my breath. I mean, I wasn't old. I was 52 years old. I had a lot of working life ahead. I had kids in school and college. And that thing had to, it had to take. So I worked very hard, and I had a wonderful editor, and it worked. So I've been doing books ever since.
That is great. Thank you for sharing that kind of information. You covered several of my questions right up front that I wanted to ask. And I just was very interested about how you even got to the point to write that book, and you covered that wonderfully. Thank you very much for that. One thing I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is to spend a couple minutes understanding a little bit about the environment around fires, activities, people that are part of the process to stop the fire. Because I suspect most people are like me. They know very little about it. We hear it on the news, we see it, and when we just go, oh my gosh, and then we hear when something bad happens. We don't really know a whole lot about what's going on. But through the course of your book, the reader will get exposed to certain things, and I'm curious if maybe you can share a little bit about it, like BLM, hotshots, smoke jumpers, hell attacks. Like these are terms I hadn't heard before reading your book. Could you spend a minute maybe helping us understand that?
Sure. The wildfire community is a very particular community. It isn't closed. I mean, it's not elitist at all, but it has its own nomenclature, as you pointed out, BLM, USFS, and all these strange names, hotshots, and so on. There are gradations of expertise in fighting fire. And the fire crews are not what they were in the 60s and 70s, which was a kind of a get-together, and if you've got a pair of boots and a work shirt, you're good to go. It's become very professionalized. The hotshots are 20-person groups held together for a season. The superintendent and perhaps his captain, which is really the foreman's job, may have a seasonal 12-month-year jobs, but the others are in for the season, out at the end of the season. And it's very hard to make a whole living out of that. They're not terribly well paid. And it's kind of like a little family, 20 people. 5 to 10% are women. It's mixed. They go out in the field and sleep together next to each other. They're close. They count on each other. Their lives depend on each other. Most of the time, those 20 people have got their butts in the air and their noses to the ground, building fire line. And they count on their superintendents to not be building fire line, but to be standing somewhere where they can see everything that's going on and to keep them safe and get them home safe at the end of the day. Smoke jumpers are a step different from that. And of course, if they think themselves as a step above that. And in some ways they are. They are more skilled. They are, for one thing, skilled in jumping out of an airplane. The hotshots will say, well, once we get on the ground, everybody's the same. That's not entirely true. Smoke jumpers are much more individualistic. Hotshots work as a team. It's 20 people. They're tied together that way. And you find out when things go to hell. Because all of a sudden, in smoke jumpers, it's every man for himself and woman. Again, the same percentage, 5 to 10% are women. And with hotshot, it isn't like that. They kind of go like a covey. They operate that way. The smoke jumpers more individualistic. And then you have the Type 2 crews, what they call the Type 2 crews, which are the crews that are pulled together, say, at a ranger station. And they will be spending a lot of their time building trail and clearing trails and doing odd jobs around in the ranger district, including burning, prescribed burning. They're not, incompetent cannon fodder. They're good people. I mean, it's a good job to have. We've got a crew like that around us at Seeley Lake in Montana, where I have a cabin. And boy, they put in a lot of work hours. They get a fire, they go. We got Type 2 crews on it. So you have to have a structure on top of this to decide, well, are we going to send the Type 2 crews or the hotshots or the smoke jumpers this time? Or maybe we need a helicopter crew to come in there, which is an entirely different thing. It isn't a lot of people, but they can get into backcountry faster than anybody get on the ground with people. So you have a superstructure. And for a lot of time, that was spread out all over hill and half of Georgia. But it's now concentrated at NIFC, which is National Interstate Fire Center, National Interagency Fire Center. And you have all the agencies that deal with fire, and there are a lot of them. Fish and Wildlife is one of them, for example. I mean, think of them, and there they are. The Forest Service is a big one. BLM, Bureau of Land Management, is a big one. Most people don't have as much contact with the BLM because they take the lands that only God and the BLM love. They get the leftovers, these huge open tracts. The Forest Service gets the forests, the National Park Service, the parks, and so on. So all these people are in the same place at NIFC, and a fire call will come in, and then they decide what to do. And they look for, among other things, air resources. There's a whole air fleet that deals with fire now, all the way from great big ones, like jumbo jets, down to very small planes. Wow. So what are you going to put on the fire? And this is coordinated, and it's pretty well thought out, and it's an enormous operation. When you say most people don't know about it, that's true, but when you start finding out about it, there's an awful lot to find out about. Yeah. And the fire itself, has a lot of say in this, but consider the kinds of things that they have to consider right away. Is this in a place where if we let it burn, it doesn't do any damage? Or is this a place where if we let it burn, it's going to take out a town and kill people? And what do you do? So these are important decisions, and they are made now in a considered way. At the time of the South Canyon fire, they were just establishing NIFC, just getting started. So that gives you a parameter here. That was 1994.
Wow. And so thanks for describing and explaining that. That's very helpful. Helitax, did I say that right? Is that the guys who drop in the smoke jumpers, or are they the ones that do they drop water, or like I've heard the term before, mud? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, mud is different. Okay, the helitack crew can either arrive by having the helicopter land and they jump off, or if that's not possible, they let a rope down and they can go down the rope. They know how to do that. Helicopters also are used to drop water. And if you ever watch one of these fires, it's really interesting because they have a bucket underneath, and they'll swing buckets swinging underneath the helicopter. They go and they drop on the fire, and then they go off to a place to replenish their water supply. And there are these big kind of swimming pool things that are set up impromptu, and then you have trucks come in and fill the swimming pool, and then the helicopter comes down with a Bambi bucket and grabs 90 gallons of water. Or there's a lake nearby, and they can go dip from the lake, and that can get very fast. Then you have a scooper plane come in, and he can scoop from the lake, and in the great mythology, he can scoop up a couple of scuba divers and drop them on the fire. It's never happened, but they do need people to get out of their way. So there's a lot going on. The helitack crews, there's a bad example where they weren't used and should have been on the Yarnell Hill fire. It killed 19 firefighters a while back, where there was a helicopter crew there the day before and they weren't properly used. They probably could have gotten the fire. So they're around, they're capable, they're highly specialized, and when used properly are extremely effective.
Yeah, and in this scenario, I'm remembering, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there were two individuals that were helitack who passed away. Was it
That's right.
Browning and Tyler, I think, is what it was?
Browning and Tyler, Rob Browning and Rich Tyler. They were used to ferry hotshots up onto the ridge. The smoke jumpers, all right, this South Canyon Fire is a good example of all this kind of working together. The first people to arrive on that fire were a Type 2 crew from nearby, and they hiked in a long way from the back and fought it one day and didn't get it. Okay, no fault of theirs. The next day, they sent smoke jumpers, and they came in and they dropped onto the fire. And then they sent a hotshot crew, the Primeville Hotshots, and they drove to the fire, below the fire, and then they were ferried up to the ridgetop by helicopter. So you have a lot of moving parts going on. And the two helitack, Browning and Tyler, operated as a separate unit when things went gunny sack. You had a lot of people on the fire line. I talked about that was one unit. And they had their own fate. And Browning and Tyler were up on the top of the ridge, and they went off on their own and tried to get away from the fire by getting to the head of the gulch and circling around, and they were caught there and killed separately. It took them a couple of days to find them, which is remarkable because that it isn't that remote. I mean, Glenwood Springs, the town of Glenwood Springs is right there. As I said, the interstate highway is right there. But I think that I know that there was a certain reluctance to be very aggressive about that because people were in shock with what had happened. They wanted to find them, but the search and rescue was kind of botched the first day it happened.
Crazy. one more general fire question, and then I want to dive right back into the book and things like that. The with anybody doing anything, achieving a task, whether it's a physician or an electrician, there's always a toolbox, right? There's something they use. Can you help paint for our viewers, like what would consist or what would exist in a toolbox of these firefighters?
Okay, basic firefighting tool is called a Pulaski. It's named for a Forest Service Ranger who was nearly killed in the Great Fire of 1910, the big blow-up of 1910. He led his men into a cave. Not all of them survived. Some of them suffocated. He survived. And his eyes were very badly damaged. But he spent the rest of his career developing this tool. So you take an axe handle. At the end of the axe handle, you need two different tools, really. You need kind of a hole so that you can dig fire line. Fire line is a clearing about 18 inches wide in most circumstances, down to mineral soil that stops flames from going across it. So you build one of these around a fire and monitor it so that anything that jumps the line you can catch. And that's the way you fight fire, with a fire line. Basic thing. So you want to dig, but then as you're digging along, you get to a root or you get to a tree. And so you need an axe. So on one end of the Pulaski is an axe, and on the other end is a hoe. And this sounds like what could be simpler, except you're going to be using this thing sometimes for 12 or 14 hours. And if it weighs a ton and it's clumsily made, you're dead. You can't handle it. So he had to get this thing so it was kind of a whiffy. That's the word I use for it. So it's kind of a whip. And he did it. And it's a thing of beauty. The original one is on display at Wallace, Idaho, which is a town that was whacked by the big burn of 1910. And he'd done it on Forest Service time, so he didn't have a personal patent on it. But they really screwed him on his eye damage, which came from the fire. They never, it wouldn't happen now. You'd just sue him and get $1 million. But they didn't pay his bills and they didn't treat him right. It's a very sad story of how that went. But he was a very great man. We all honor him. And the tool has stayed the same. I have 3 or 4 of them. I carry one in my vehicle and always have. It's enormously useful.
Yeah.
You get into a back country and you got a little log across the road and you can't get through it. Get the Pulaski and chop it out of there. And other uses. So it's a great thing. That's one tool.
Yeah.
Then everybody, said, well, I can make a tool too. And so you get different things and with different uses, all the way from grass fires where you have a flapper, which is a big rubber thing and you flap the grass and put the fire out. Down to things that look like rakes and hoes. And, the boys and girls get busy in the shop when they're not fighting a fire. What do? They make things. They make things to work for them. So you see a whole spectrum of different firefighting tools. Then you get to the people who aren't the ground pounders, people who are engines, we call them engine slugs, which isn't fair. I've been around a lot of these guys, and they are in fine shape. Thank you very much. But they have a different thing. They use water. It's interesting how they do it. They don't just sit there like a structure firefighter and spray water on the fire. Use it very judiciously to knock things down, and then you can move in and attack on the ground. But that's a whole different set of things. And a different set of disciplines. I mean, you have to deal with an engine that is pumping a lot of water, which is like a structural fire engine. You have to know what the hoses should be, what the nozzle should be, what the pressure should be, how much water you've got left, and that kind of thing. It's a different game and a very effective game.
That's it. That's interesting.
when
Thank you
used
for,
properly.
yeah.
Little caveat at the end of every one of these.
Yeah, because as I'm like in my mind's eye, as I'm reading the book, I'm thinking and envisioning like the backpack and the different things, and I'm thinking to myself, some of these firefighters, and you said, like you said, the hotshots, they're a team. So maybe they distributed some of the tools between them. I'm not sure, but I kept thinking, I'm tired just thinking about what the kinds of things they probably had to carry up there, and they're going up this crazy terrain. So it's just interesting.
Well, think of the basic test the final test for smoke jumpers, which is to carry a 100-pound pack 3 miles in a stated amount of time. I mean, it just, what?
Wow.
I mean, you have to be in absolutely fabulous condition to get into this. And, you can work your way into it. Type 2 crews, the standards aren't quite as high. Hot shots and so on. Smoke jumpers are the ones that are the most demanding. But there's a whole community that does this, and it becomes an important part of their lives. And they make the money in the summer to send themselves to community college in the off season, and they wind up doing interesting things in life other than fire.
Yeah.
Some people make a profession out of fire and find different jobs in it, but it's a pyramid. I mean, the big bottom on the pyramid, lots of people involved, fewer and fewer as you go up like a lot of professions.
I want to dive back into the book. Before I do that, I thought of one other question real quick, and I'm afraid that I'll forget about it later. Quick question. What are one or two things that you think your general person doesn't know about these wildfires?
We need more of them. There is a terrible problem today and everybody has written about it and talked about it, and you can kind of list the things. There are a lot of areas that is ready to burn. The two big changes that I've talked about for 25 years have been climate change, which has made the forest drier and more combustible, and the presence and acceleration and development of the wildland-urban interface, which means houses close to areas that are going to burn, so that you fight harder for those and you do more for those. You would add to that logging hasn't been stopped, but it's really been curtailed. For example, my cabin is in Cedar Lake, Montana, and there's a small resort town there that is supported heavily by the Pyramid Lumber Company, one of the last sawmills around, and it's going bankrupt. And it's gotten close before and been saved by loans and one thing or another. It looks like this time it may happen. It's a catastrophe. The Forest Service used to take 60 million board feet a year out of our valleys, and now it's next to nothing. But what they do get, they have to mill, and now they're going to have to go somewhere farther to get it milled and so on. It's just not a good situation. But one of the things that can help is prescribed fire in various guises. One is having a fire start from lightning, natural start, and whoever is responsible for that land has looked at it ahead of time and said, well, this is one we can let go. And so you let it go. And it burns out a lot of stuff that needs to be burned out. Another way of doing this is with prescribed fire, where you go in and say, we need to punch a hole in the forest right here to stop a big fire from really getting rolling. And we don't need more than about a 30 or 40 acre fire, but we need that badly. Now we need to find time to do that when the smoky skies are not going to make everybody within 100 miles rushing to their phone to complain. And the elk hunters in the fall are complaining they don't want smoke in the sky either. And well, the window for this happening has shrunk over the years. I used to be able to burn in the fall on my little holding at Cedar Lake. I'd have a slash pile, 2 or 3 small ones, and burn it myself, get a pal to help. You need 2 people really for safety's reasons. Now you can't do that in the fall. You have to do it in the spring. I'm not there in the spring. You need snow on the ground when you do it. So when I have one of those, I have some friends do it. But that's cutting the burn season in half. So then when the fires hit, we've had two big ones near Seeley Lake that nearly took out the town, and one of them was scheduled to take all the cabins, including mine. The wind shifted, and it didn't. But these are 60,000 plus acre fires, and we had never had that when I was a kid. So these fires are getting bigger. They are more dangerous because they are getting bigger. Anybody who's been in fire for 25 years will tell you that they're more intense. This is very hard to measure. This fire is a climate change fire. It's very hard to do that. But climate change has had an effect, and anybody with any sense just says, yeah, of course it has. Things are drier and hotter. That's going to affect the fires. So that's what's going on. It's not healthy. It's not good. You've got fires right now in Canada, a little early for this, sending smoke down into the lower 48. It was really bad last year. It may be bad again this year. Last year we didn't have a bad fire season in the lower 48. These things come and go. You can get lucky and get past one, and then the next year it's a 10 million acre season. Wow. So trying to pin everything down is wrong. You can't do that. But you can say some things in the broad sense that climate change has had an effect, more housing has had an effect, treating the forest with intelligent timber harvest and fire is a way to go, but there are hurdles for it all over the place, including legal hurdles. I mean, if you have a prescribed fire, you put in the plan, you may get sued. It may be a very good idea, but somebody may not like it, an environmental group or whoever, and they will sue you and they can stop it. The courts get involved in this. It isn't just, the guys out in the forest making all the decisions the way they used to. And this year we're going to have 60 million board feet coming out of the Swan and Clearwater valleys, and if you don't like it, tough luck. I mean, that was the 60s and 70s, and not no more.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that. So, but you explained it pretty well. So I'm like, okay, I see the logic behind needing to do or letting some fires happen or even needing them to happen. So, in your preparation for the book, just diving back in that direction for a minute, what was the most memorable or impactful moment for you in the research, and as you were putting things together? Was there something that really stood out for you above other things in the research and prep and writing the book?
The people. My entrance into the wildland fire community, the kind of people that I met, the friendships that I established, some of which I've maintained, some of which have been most important friendships of my life. Bob and Nadine Maclean are gone now, but they were friends of mine until their deaths, and others. And it was eye-opening. It was wonderful and horrible. I mean, you'd sit with these people, remembering their kids who were burned to death, and it can get very terrible. But you get into them as people, and you down to the bottom of them in situations like this, and the bottom is good.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. This next question is where I got this thought from. So in a couple weeks, I have an interview with a surviving member of the also mudslide or landslide situation that happened in 2014. And a little nervous about the interview because this is a person who's gone through a lot of pain and stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, I need to be careful how I approach this because there's probably going to be a lot of raw emotions and feelings as the survivor. In your case, you were doing some of the same thing. Was that very difficult, or did your background as a journalist help you through that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how did you do that?
Yeah. I mean, my interview technique, such as it is silence. I've been talking a blue streak, Tony, but I'm normally a very quiet person. And I think if you convey empathy and understanding, and make a real effort to figure this thing out, to get the facts. That's what they respected. And I made it a rule that I would always come back. I wrote the book. I've written 5 books on fire. And my rule is I will always go back and look the people in the eye that I wrote about. And if they wanted to say something good, bad, or indifferent, I would listen. So listening is very important. An honest effort to find out about their world is very important. And a willingness to be there to take the consequences of what you write. Journalism is not in good odor these days. And one of the criticisms I've had of my fellow journalists is the little people who come in and they write their little story and then they run away. And, oh, you can't touch me because I ran away. I may have written nasty things about you, but I'm gone.
Wow.
Ha. That stinks. And if you want to write a good book that stands up afterward, that's not how you operate. One of my books is about the Esperanza fire in California. And when it was over, there was a gathering in the town where most of the people came from who were killed. And it was at a kind of a movie theater barn kind of thing. And I got up on stage and I gave my talk about the book and a PowerPoint program. And then they had the engine captains who were with the guy who was killed and his crew that day come up and sit on the stage. I'd interviewed all of them for the book, and sit on the stage and react to the book. This was just right after it came out. I had no idea what they were going to say. And I sat there with them. And at the end of that, I was happy. Now, I wish other people in journalism would behave in a way where they can always come back after they've written a story and look people in the eye that they wrote about.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's important. And I'm sure those people really appreciated that so much.
We're friends still. I mean, these people, the engine captains and I maintain, they're in California, and I haven't seen them in years and all that. But when we do have some kind of a connection, like the social media is a really good way to stay in touch.
Yeah.
It's always mutually respectful.
That book provided so much. There's so many things in there, and I'm going to say it again, people. You need to read the book. It's amazing. For you, what aspect?
This is what he's talking about. Fire in the mountain.
That's right. And folks, I will put that on the screen as well. So we'll have it.
I thought I'd preempt you.
Yeah, no, for sure we will. I'll probably leave it up the whole time too, because I think people need to see it and go look for that book. But what aspects of, or what from that book, what are you hoping the readers will pull away and understand most? Because there's so much there. Yeah.
I think that after the South Canyon fire, there's a blame game. Of course, there always is. It's a normal human thing. Let's not, pretend that this is some anomaly particular just to this thing. But a lot of time has passed, and I think what I hope people would get out of the book today is, if you're in fire, get some lessons out of it. That's very important. But get a sense of walking where these people walk, making the decisions that they made. One of the things that came out of the South Canyon fire, one of the really marvelous things, was the adoption by the United States Forest Service of staff rides. Each of the regions of the Forest Service has to now have a staff ride. What is a staff ride? The Prussians invented this thing, and they were great militarists. And what you do is you establish decision points or around a fire where key decisions were made. And then you get a bunch of young kids, and you assign them the roles of the people who were involved in those decisions. And they go to the actual place where it happened. And they've done their reading. That's very important. So they're all read up on this. And they know which character they're playing. And then they confront the decisions that were made. What is your decision? Oh, it's different from what you thought when you were sitting there. Oh, what the hell? They just made the wrong decision. Should have gone left when they went right. That's easy. No, it ain't easy. It's real life. My dad's fire, the Man Gulch fire, as I said, is coming up for its 75th anniversary this year. And one of the things that's being done, an awful lot of things being done. Man Gulch is more vibrantly alive today than it was 25 years ago at the 50th. But they're now going to have a staff ride. And the decision points, the narrator is a guy named Dave Turner, who has devoted a lot of his professional life to Man Gulch. He really knows the stuff. They're going to make it available online. This is marvelous. Because then what you can take out of it is a lot of what the people that day experienced, how they made their decisions. And if you get that out of the book, some sense of who these people were as people and how hard those decisions were. I mean, when Bob and I, Mackie and I, stood at that point where Don made his decision, Don was totally alone. No one would have faulted him for saving his own life and going with his friends. Well, they would have, but I mean, not to say that because they faulted him for everything else until they read my book. These are not simple, spur-of-the-moment kinds of calls. They are life and death calls. And when you're on the ground, that comes real to you. And I hope when you're in the book, some of that becomes real to you, so that you do experience some of what they experienced and get away from making easy judgments about the very tough calls that people made that resulted in death. I mean, mistakes were made. Hey, did they make a mistake? Well, they got killed. That tells you something. But how they got there is something where I've always felt, boy, I could have made every one of those mistakes and worse.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that happens too much in society now is a quick judgment on people that have split-second decisions that have huge impacts on their life or others. And it's hard because we don't know what that's like. And, your point is exactly right, is that, taking a moment to put ourselves in their place, I think helps us just have an appreciation for the moment and stop judging people for that, because I think most people are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, walk a mile on their fire boots when you talk to me.
Exactly. Couple more things. We're running close to an hour, and I'm so glad that that we were able to carve an hour of your time out. What would you say to the audience about the powerful and devastating power or force of forest fires? I mean, once again, people see it at a distance, but what would you say about this to them so they can appreciate this?
When you're around one, follow directions and stay the hell away from it. I mean, these things are very unpredictable. And you can see this thing billowing smoke and going away from you, and 2 minutes later it's coming right at you. And the fire doesn't care. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't know who you are, doesn't know what a wonderful person you are, how nice you are to your kids. You've been a good son or daughter. Nah, you're going to get wiped if you're in the way. So if you're on the road and you get stopped and you say, oh, this is my vacation, they're stopping me, I really wanted to go fishing today, or I wanted blah, 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 blah. Have a little thought for yourself. There's a reason you're not being allowed to go in there. And it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. There's going to be more of this kind of thing unless climate change is reversed in some way. Start sucking carbon out of the air, they find something, or there's a sunspot that changes it all. I mean, it ain't going to get better. It's just going to keep getting a lot worse.
Yeah. Um, as we move towards the end of the interview, what is there anything that probably I should have asked you? Is there something that you're thinking?
I always ask
man,
people that question at the end, and I never get a decent answer. So is there anything I should have asked you here? You know, I screw up some. And they kind of look blank at me because by then it's been an hour or something like
right.
that. Their mind has turned to jello.
Yeah, I thought I'd ask before we get to the hour point.
So, no, I think you asked everything that could possibly be asked, Tony. You did a great job.
Awesome. Hey, this has been great. Before we wrap up, once again, people read this book. I keep, one of the memories I have of the book is the moment, and I can't remember his name. I tried so hard to remember his name, where he got his arms burned, and he had to come back and get treated.
Eric Hipke.
Yes, Hipke.
Yeah.
I was like, that moment that we're going through that in the book, I was just like, oh man.
Yeah.
You know, powerful. There's so many like that.
Now, he was off being a smoke jumper by the end of that season. He's an incredible physical specimen. He became a very, very good friend of mine. Alas, I haven't seen him in a long time. I think he's retired now from the Forest Service. But absolutely wonderful guy. Helped me enormously. When I wrote the account that you're talking about of his burning, it was very hard to write because he didn't remember it all that well. He'd remember it one way one time and another way another time. And we wound up with me at my computer right here in this room, with Eric right here on my shoulder going through that. Now, what about this? Is this sentence? What about that kind of thing? Wow. So that at the end, he said, you know, this has explained to me what happened. So wow. I didn't really understand before what happened, but because we've walked it through step by step by step and done it over and over and over and over and over again, I think now I have a real understanding of how I was burned. He broke away from the main group, and he's a powerful guy with legendary legs, and made it up the ridge. And just as he got to the ridge top, boom, the fire hit him from the back. Did he jump or was he pushed? And he couldn't figure it out. Wow. Well, when we finally settled it, as you see in the book, you know, both things happened. Yeah. But that account there is one that was earned with blood, sweat, and tears. Yes. Powerful moment among many in that book. What's next for you, John? Oh, I got tired of writing about fire because I started getting sad. And so I've been writing about fishing. And I've got two books out, Home Waters, which is a chronicle of my family in Montana, mostly. And I wrote a long foreword to Ernest Hemingway's Big Two-Hearted River as a consequence of Home Waters. And I've been writing about Hemingway and fishing since. And I'm working on shorter pieces, Tony, because I don't really want to take on a book. My books took me 5 years. And I'm not of an age where that is really a good idea. Put it that way. You know, my doctors look at me and say, you know, you're doing really well, all things considered. Wow. So I'm doing really well, and I'm having fun, and I'm writing a piece right now. Not writing it yet, I'm putting it together I hope for Field and Stream on the rewards and challenges of fishing late in life, where you lose some things and you gain some things. It's called Fishing into the Twilight. Nice. And it's opened up a lot of things I hadn't thought about that are really very good. There are two rivers in my life, big ones, that have gotten better in the last 30 years. I mean, how many rivers can you say that about? As trout fishing rivers. The Blackfoot River in Montana has gotten better, thanks to my dad's book, The River Runs Through It, and a lot of work by a lot of people. And Penn's Creek in Pennsylvania, dead center Pennsylvania, which I've fished for 30 years. I was just up there last week and had the best day I've ever had on it. Wow. The fish have gotten steadily bigger. The average fish has gotten steadily bigger over those 30 years because of changes in regulations. Yesterday I spent a while on the phone talking to a state fish biologist about why that has happened and what the future looks like, so that some things can get better. And when you're at my stage of life, where you're looking about, how are we going to wind this up? I think that the people I've seen who are happy are the ones who are dealing with conservation, who are trying to leave it better than they found it, and have succeeded in some ways, and are either watching that go forward and maybe hoping that somebody else will pick up the standard and carry it on, or just enjoying a great day on Penns Creek because things have gotten better, and finding out how that happened and trying to give it a little push. So that's what I'm doing.
That's great. That is wonderful. Well, as we get ready to button this episode up, how can people tie into you, follow you, connect with you, see what, just see what's going on? Is there a way for them to do that?
I have a website, johnmacleanbooks.com, and I don't keep it up to date, but I am on Facebook, and that's fairly up to date. If you're going to ask to be friended, please have more than one photo and say something about yourself. If somebody has a friend request and there's nothing in there about themselves, sorry, who the hell are you?
Right.
And you get a lot of these weird things coming. I think they're pirated profiles. Yeah. But anybody who's got a good, solid Facebook page and wants to get friended up, I'm perfectly happy to do it. And, I'm not your pen pal, but we might exchange a message once a year or less, depending. And you can always buy the books.
Yes.
You can buy them, signed copies through the website. Happy to do that. I have a little thing I'll send you on how to do that. I'm not begging it. I'm happy with my marketing and sales. I'm not barking for it, but it's there. And some people like that. And one of the popular things that I have sold are first editions of my dad's book, A River Runs Through It, the little blue book. Those are expensive, but those can be had. That's my life.
Wonderful. That's been great. I may keep you on for a minute when we close off the interview, but I want to wish you a great summer and so all the success in your future work. And maybe we'll bump into each other down the road and I can chat with you again. But it's been a lot of fun today. And as we wrap up, I just want to say to everybody out there, remember, there's a lot of strange and unexpected out there in our universe and in our reality. Keep your mind, your eyes, and your heart open. And until next time, stay safe.
Thank you for listening to High Strangeness. This was a glance at some of the strange that exists in our reality.